we say in Hebrew, Tichle Shana V'Kilelotea, a year with its curses has gone by, Tachel Shana V'Birchotea. And so let the new year begin with its blessings. And, you know, we had a tough summer in Israel. It wasn't easy. I personally I was born in a kibbutz, Kibbutz Na'an. You know that kibbutz with the sprinklers? And basketball, that's what we were good for. And that's why my English is not so bad, because I was a point guard and played with Americans. And as a kid, I got the music. But don't ask me complicated questions. It was a tough year and a tough summer, and I come from the Golani Brigade, Special Forces of Golani, and we had quite a task in our unit, although, you know, I wasn't in, of course. But this time, I was a proud father to 3 daughters, 3 of them in Special Forces, 2 in Miluim, but 1 in the Navy, and actually the Navy SEALs in research and development. And this gorgeous blonde was in the summer in all kinds of places. And it was a very humbling and worrying experience. But you know, every Israeli soldier this summer that had to go into Gaza did not go in because of hate or because of a need to revenge or because of anything like that. We actually went in on the ground the day after a bunch of terrorists showed up near the dining hall in a kibbutz in a tunnel that was an attack tunnel. And if we thought that we had a choice of not doing anything or being you know, very contained with ourselves, we suddenly didn't. And so this was very much out of necessity. And I think it brought together people from different parts of Israel, rich, poor. That's what the army does for you. The tank doesn't know which social, economic background you're coming from. I have to say that there were a few new phenomena this summer. One was that if you looked really carefully, it wasn't Arabs against Jews, because every mother or father that had their kids involved, or you know, a wife or a spouse that had their partners involved, saw the need not only for a military operation but also for negotiations and pressure on that front. And you saw countries like Egypt as an ally. You saw countries like Jordan as an ally. You saw the Palestinian Authority that was cooperating with Israel on the security issues, even though lately they've been very problematic in the UN, but they actually cooperated on a security level. So you saw moderate Palestinians and extreme Palestinians. And you saw that you needed to fight the extremists, but you also needed to cooperate with those that are willing, perhaps, to cooperate with you. And you also saw countries from the Arab League. You even saw, you know, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, and you saw a need for a new alliance in the Middle East that was not just Arabs against Jews, but it was moderates against the extremists. And that, for Israel, is maybe an opportunity, although it's a challenge for the region at large. But, you know, understanding what Hamas is as a threat, or what Hezbollah is as a threat in the north, maybe somewhat similar, even if there are differences, and there are clear differences with ISIS that is threatening both Syria but also Jordan from the east, and Al-Qaeda that's threatening Egypt in the Sinai. And suddenly you had a little bit of cooperation. Remember, like after 9/11, you had cooperation between different countries on the security threat, that people started talking to each other. And so I think this threat creates somewhat of an opportunity for communications in the Middle East, which is new. And I think interesting to watch carefully, but to watch. To me, the biggest image of victory was not on the battlefield. I'm an entrepreneur. I build a lot of companies. I'm a Jerusalemite, so I built a lot of these companies in Jerusalem and in other parts of the country. And I built a cybersecurity incubator when I was still an entrepreneur before I entered the Knesset, which is the biggest incubator of that kind in the Negev in Beersheba. And actually, Project Interchange of AJC was a partner in advocating this agenda and this idea. And we were, a day after the ceasefire that we didn't know was going to be a ceasefire that was actually going to be, respected, because none of the ceasefires before were respected. And you saw 150 young entrepreneurs coming back from Miluim, maybe a day earlier, and saying they were going to build their next company in the south, in Beersheba or around it. And you saw why Israel will never be defeated. Because we're not bombers, we're builders. And we were ready to build yet another company and another social project and another educational project and another theme and story and new frontier that we want to conquer. And if you remember what a pioneer was 100 years ago when my party, the labor movement, remember Ben-Gurion and Berel Katzenelson, all these guys, and you do a refresh, you now see maybe an entrepreneur in the Negev, or maybe a social activist in the north, or maybe a cultural leader of the community in Jerusalem. And you saw that spirit that was so strong and so determined and so willing and able and humble at times, because, when you build these things and there's rockets or things like that, it's not so easy. And to me, I was so moved, and that's the image of what we need to do in Israel. And the interesting thing is that Israel, we're very proud of our success, and I'm in chapter 2, 3, and 13 in the Startup Nation book. And we like it a lot. But if we look at it on a social level, about 1/3 of the country has been successful. And about 2/3 is somewhat behind. People ask me, why are you coming into public life? Well, you could either go like this or like that. The 2/3 are in the far north, in the far south, in the ultra-Orthodox community that is not always involved in the new economy, in the Arab Israeli community that is also looking to get involved, and in the underprivileged neighborhoods in the big cities that actually Jerusalem has. The thing that I'm most proud of, and I created many companies over the years, but the project that I'm most proud of is not a for-profit, but a social profit project in Jerusalem called Bakihila, in the community, which 12 years ago, at the height of the Intifada, poverty was just so difficult in Jerusalem. You felt challenges here around New York as well. And my wife and I, we set up this nonprofit organization that just celebrated 25,000 kids that went through the program with a variety of volunteers over 6 neighborhoods, 5 Jewish neighborhoods and 1 Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem. And these neighborhoods are so close to the more advanced neighborhoods that it's mind-boggling to see that 800 yards on one side you have a kid that doesn't always bring a sandwich to school, and 700 yards on the other side you have a girl that didn't take an exam at all, not to say got a good grade or a bad grade, just didn't take exam. And there's so many families in Israel that are second or maybe sometimes even third generation of underprivileged and poverty. And to me, this is unacceptable. In a country that has so much intensity and innovation and capabilities and abilities, the fact that we're leaving parts of society behind, to me, is unacceptable. And I think that in addition to, giving them a chance on the educational side, what I'm doing is I'm bringing a lot of my business experience to a national level. And instead of working with company after company, I work with region after region in the country. And the first region after Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, I created the Media Quarter, which is in the old train station, if anybody's been there lately. And there's the biggest new media incubator overlooking the old city, and there's the biggest performing arts center and great music, and there's the social project that we talked about. And in Jerusalem, in the height of the Second Intifada, coming up with a creative narrative next to the historical narrative was very important for the character of the city. Remember, everybody likes to swear by the borders of Jerusalem, but the leaders need to do more for the character of Jerusalem, for giving people who live there a chance. And so we created this narrative, and I think there was a big awakening in the city, and a new narrative has come forward. And Jerusalem doesn't have to be like Tel Aviv. It has other assets and other treasures, and some of them are spiritual as well as material. And it's a city that I think if Tel Aviv is the exciting city of Israel, then you just watch, Jerusalem is going to become the exciting city in the Middle East under different political circumstances that we hope will present themselves, or we could lead there. But the second region that I went after, and actually it was so coincidental with AJC's coming to visit and being part of the Beersheba initiative, was the south in Beersheba. And what I ask a region, like the Negev, or later we'll talk about the Galilee, is not what are your problems, although I have my notebook and I write all the problems down, but I ask a region that's been behind what it is that you could do that you will be best in the country. Or in other words, what it is that's your biggest opportunity that's untapped. Because it's not only in Herzliya and Tel Aviv that people want to get in on the new economy that Israel is presenting to the world, but in some other parts of Israel, people are interested as well. And so in Beersheba, the answer was cybersecurity, because of the computer science division in Ben Gurion University that grew from 5,000 to 20,000 students in 10 years. And because the fact the army was moving to the south, and so we could request that the technology unit will be on the campus. And because Israel high-tech, the world is getting attacked left and right, and we Israelis, it's actually one of the things that we know how to do well, is defend, sometimes attack, and create a center of excellence. What I can tell you, that together with good folks like that were coming from the US, and some of them even investing, I set the first incubator for the South in that field, which was cybersecurity. And in a matter of less than 2 years, we have 720 employees that are the brightest minds that came out of the university, and maybe some of them came from abroad and from the center of Israel, and are there. And next to the Israeli companies, there's EMC, a big storage company from Massachusetts, and Cisco and GE, and now I was just in Washington. I'm now, as part of the Knesset, head of the task force of the South. I'm actually serving a little bit as the foreign minister of Beersheba. And so I was meeting Lockheed Martin, who's coming, and IBM, who's coming. And our vision is 5,000 employees in the technology field in Beersheba in 5 years. And next to every employee in the technology field, there's 2 or 3 employees in small businesses and services and social affairs. And so it's 20,000 new, dynamic people in the South. That's a new center of excellence in Israel that is not in the center. That's like the Ben Gurion concept. Remember that he went to Sde Boker, stood on his head? Well, this is what he would see, because it's putting the South in a certain center. And to me, that's what we need. We need to unleash the energy, the potential, the goodwill, the capabilities of people around the country into, we built Israel once. We need to build it again, including more parts of the population and including more regions in the country, and letting a lot of the good things that we know how to do, both in Israel and in our tribe around the world, be exercised. The second region that we went after is the far north, in the upper Galilee, in the Galilee, near the town of Kiryat Shmona. There it's a different challenge, because there you don't have one big city like Jerusalem or Beersheba. You have a bunch of kibbutzim, which are actually doing very well agriculturally, and you have Kiryat Shmona and Chatzor and Tzfat, which are not doing so well economically, and you have Moshavim, and you have Druze villages and Arab villages, and you have a mixture. So what I demanded of them is we'll work together, but only as a team, because none of you villages is a significant economic unit if you're going to lead something large in changing the country. And so we got together. It's like a brainstorming session. It's like local leadership, business community, Knesset members. Here you would say bipartisan effort. In Israel, it's multi-partisan effort. We have a lot of parties. So to me, it's very important to get members of all the parties that are interested involved, because let it make them their agenda, because that way they'll have ownership and they'll push it from their own political perspective. And I think these are things that we could agree on. These are not things that are divisive. These are things that we can come together on. We don't need just wars to come together around, right? I mean, we can have constructive things that we can come together around. And so the Galilee, I'm telling you, you are among the first to know, is proposing to lead the world with a combination of agriculture, biotechnology, and food in a new category that will be called medical food. Food that heals, food that prevents disease, and food that heals disease. So next to the FDA, in the future, you'll have drugs in the FDA, which is a very cumbersome and very expensive. It's about $1 billion to develop a drug, right? And who can do that with early stage investing? And but next to that, you'll have a therapeutic process around food that's going to require much less restrained processes, because these will be things that we eat normally, and you can have a pomegranate with 60 times the antioxidants, and instead of selling it for cents, you can sell it for dollars or for gold. And you can have seaweed that can cure you of different things, and you could just have great things that Israelis are coming up with all the time, but are never or not always monetizing. And we need to understand that invention is great, and invention that's monetized is jobs and opportunities. And a lot of these efforts are coordinated into the U.S. and with the U.S. and with companies here. And just like you had EMC move on a technology level, I want PepsiCo to open up a 100-people facility for food that is tasty and maybe not fattening or things like that. So the Galilee has a different story to tell, and I think it will be trying to tell it. And the interesting thing to notice is that it's not just an economic story. It's an economic opportunity which creates a narrative on a broader social level, because Tel Chai College is involved, and the college in Tzfat is involved, and a bunch of the younger, dynamic people, and the people that are a little older and know their stuff in these fields are involved, and it just creates a great combination between different parts of societies in the North that were not always working together. I think that for many of us that are coming, well, some of us that are coming anew to the Knesset, the idea is to bring some of the new concepts that we're using in business or in the media industry or in the film, and wherever you come from, into the political life, so that there's a little bit of fresh thinking and concepts to address some of Israel's most challenging problems. And I think that if we want to tie the economic development theme to the security alliance theme in the region, one of the things I'm busy doing in Washington and around the region as well is finding some Arab countries and partners that are interested in partnering around concepts like water. Water is a big issue in the Middle East, and a symbol too. And Israel has the best technology for desalination of water. Energy, we found natural gas, and the region needs it, and we now are having a deal with Jordan and Egypt. Agriculture, desert agriculture, how to flourish in the desert. We know something about this. And technology. There's actually a bunch of things going on the technology level. And so what I'm interested in is taking some of the alliance discussions on the security front and augmenting them with some economic concepts so that maybe we can start building both a vision internally that has intensity and inclusion and a new challenge and a new story and a new horizon and a new partnership both with the world and definitely with with our people around the world that doesn't portray Israel as a fort, but portrays Israel as a hub with a strong army. We need that. Because remember what Ben-Gurion said after the 1948 war. You need to be as strong as the 7 armies around you if you're going to survive. That's why we have strong technology. And by the way, he said something else that we didn't fulfill in this past summer, was that if you're going to fight a war, fight it in less than 2 weeks on enemy soil and get it over with conclusion. I don't want to do it again, but this was not achieved this time, but it was achieved in some of the other instances. And so I think some of the new concepts and some of the new ideas are necessary, are needed, are something of interest that we have, both in terms of developing Israel internally, but also in terms of the dialogue we have with nations around the world, and even nations, perhaps, in the region. We were talking about anti-Semitism that's going on in Europe, and we were talking about some of the challenges that we're facing, and we are facing challenges. But sometimes, you can get and be right in an argument that is not always good for you to be in the middle of. So Sweden just made a comment by the new prime minister about accepting the Palestinian state, not as part of negotiations. But I have to say something. I did business with Jerusalemite and Swedish companies. We put them together, and some of this was very successful. And so I had the parliamentary task force of friendship between the Israeli and the Swedish parliament. And then the last big visit that we had, they wanted from our Knesset to talk about anti-Semitism in the Swedish parliament. And this is, an interesting and sore subject, but I asked that the subject would be different this time. I asked that the subject would be innovation. So the Swedish parliament took an entire day to talk about Israel and innovation and joint ventures between Israel and Sweden. Now, did we win all the arguments about anti-Semitism in Sweden? No. But did we have economic development task forces that are now working together on opportunities? Yes. And so sometimes one needs to realize that it's not always winning a debate, because sometimes it's really hard. They say, Israel, we have a big PR problem, which we do. But sometimes it's not just the PR, it's the product that you want to discuss. And I think it's time in our generation that new leadership will rise, that will speak an additional language than the language of security only. Security is important. Having a strong army is critical. The survival of Israel needs to be based on that too, of course. But we need some new concepts in developing the Israeli society, and we need some new concepts on developing the new partnership between Israel and the Jewry around the world, concepts which are more pluralistic, more open, more win-win, of different views, different spiritual views of our interpretation of Judaism. There isn't just one view, and where we can all feel part of the same, of the same process, even though we may have a little bit of a different interpretation. And also bring a little bit of a different approach. You know who was the last maybe great Israeli leader that brought that approach and changed the agenda? Is Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin was a general, and nobody had to tell him anything about Israel's security. And he was the general and the chief of staff in the Six-Day War. And there was quite a challenges that we had security-wise then, but he took a decision. And if it wasn't for the decision that the government took during that time, with one social economic arm that was reached out with new concepts, which gave a big boost to the incubator program in Israel and a big boost to the technology field and the small businesses and some of the periphery areas in Israel. But it also spoke out of moral and practical conviction in the same manner that Ben Gurion spoke and allowed us to reach a resolution and accept it in the UN for the inception of the state in 1948, which, even though we have our historical rights for this land, there's also another people in this land. And so there's a practical consideration, and there's a moral consideration as well, to have a two-state solution in some form that is going to be practically allowing Israel to define its border proactively and move on and not just be defined by the conflict. One. Two, morally speaking, I don't want to send, I don't know, I'm not thinking about grandsons yet. My daughters are mature, but I'm not thinking about grandsons. But if I think about grandsons for a minute, I am proud of the Israeli army, but I don't like the phenomena of being an occupying force in certain cities forever. I don't think this is something we want. Now, it's true that Israel offered an open invitation to a compromise more than one time. And it's true that anybody who wants to be a skeptic has the arguments on their side. We don't have Canada as our neighbor. We have different neighbors. But it's also true that if we look at the region and the opportunities in the region today and the threats and the allies that we can have, we can think about making carefully, with security assurance, a few proactive moves that maybe can change the game a little bit, not to just an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but something that is more broader defined and can give Israel not only a sense of what we have to give back, but also what we can gain. Because a security alliance with a moderate or more moderate states that are willing to actually fight the extremists, and an economic vision that has some cooperation, is something that we could put on a pedestal, is something that we can try to proactively lead towards. And so when the Shana Hadashah, when the New Year is coming together, some of the country is still ailing on the civilian level, and people that didn't make a living in small businesses or in situations that were not easy in the South and didn't have restaurants that were basically closed or small businesses that needed help. We're working with one after one. We're not always satisfied with the support of the government, but at least there's a strong dialogue around some of these things, and trying to further the revival of the South and also the revival of other parts of the country. And we're thinking about the debate that we have within our society. And actually, some of this debate is a legitimate debate, a debate that should be had. And it's actually a debate in Israel and a debate within our people about what direction we should try and lead and try and take. And I'm proud, having accomplished in the business world, and before that I was studying here for my PhD at Columbia University, and so getting my own background, I'm proud to be able to be part of the Israeli Knesset, to be part of some of the new ideas that we're trying to implement, to be part in the dialogue with many of my partners here in the U.S. that are idea partners, and some which were business partners as well, that I'm now trying to recruit to the public realm to help with some of the initiatives in Israel. And I'm really honored and thankful that you invited me here. And it's great to be speaking to you. And even though we had a challenging year, let's have a much better year. And let's have that year as a year of building, of creating, of health, and of luck. We need some good luck. Because, on the Titanic, you may have been healthy, but you weren't lucky. And so we need that too. And thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. So what is Israel trying to do to improve its PR for the rest of the world? That is an issue, isn't it? When I was a student on Columbia campus in 1988, the first Intifada broke out, and in '82 I was fighting in the First Lebanon War, and I was in West Beirut, and I felt like I was in West Beirut all over again with Edward Said and big halls and Palestinian flags, and it was quite a challenge to be a student on campus from Israel. And so in the beginning there were big arguments. And then we found a trick, which was actually out of sincerity. We had debates with the Arab Club. We held debates in an open place like this, and we brought all the difficult issues to the table. And we held this around 8 campuses around the U.S. It was called Dialogue, a group of Israeli students that were going and holding these debates. And what we did is we were able to diffuse a lot of the anger and attacks into something that was contained, into a process that was contained at the time. And I found that very effective. I think that often people will try to avoid the issue or not deal with the issue. I was beginning a case with a intelligence group in Israel, and I was beginning to build it called the Case Against Hamas. And what I was trying to do, and actually we gave it, I don't know if you saw it, but we gave a lot of the information to a Forbes reporter that wrote a big piece, Bechal, about some of the numbers that didn't add up and some of the things that were just wrongly portrayed. And that was somewhat effective in delegitimizing some of the, in some of the things that Israel was blamed for. But I'll tell you what was 10 times more effective, and that's why I didn't continue to pursue it. What was 10 times more effective is after that day that I told you about the entrepreneurs, we had the biggest cybersecurity conference, once again in the South, and we had so many American companies, and we had so much people from the media and other places talking about some of these things that were going on, and I just felt that this was a much stronger argument than being locked into the debate about how many people were killed in Gaza and what neighborhood and how many rockets fell in every Israeli city. And I think that in general, the proactive approaches that we need to take need to be signaled and discussed as initiatives that we want to take to the world. And I think that we should say what we want so that people could respond to us, whether they agree to us or not, what we propose. And I think that we should try to set some of the conversation and not have all the problems ours. I mean, ISIS is a huge problem. It's not just Israel's problem right now, it's the Middle East's problem. Or the Muslim rise and some of the extremist movements in Europe, it's a big problem. It's not our problem. Let's not make it our problem. In other words, let's try to set a little bit of a different agenda in terms of the product that we built and not just the PR around it. So setting the discussion, what you discuss, is as important as winning a certain argument that somebody else set for you. You're asking about the settlements and what's really going on. So, look, labor was involved in building some of the settlements. The French Hill, in some language, is a settlement because we built this on open, vacant land in Jerusalem, and some people consider this as a settlement. But so where is it that we want to go in terms of a two-state solution in the West Bank? In Gaza, we don't have a territorial dispute. We have other disputes, but we don't have a territorial dispute because the border is set, right? Israel withdrew. Ariel Sharon, a leader that came from the right, became a moderate right centrist leader towards the end of his life and made a bold move and I think was going to sweep Israel forward, and then he had a stroke. But I think that we should come to it from what we want. And what we want is an agreement with 3 blocks of settlements that were already agreed on around Jerusalem, around Gush Etzion, and maybe even around Ariel. And that accounts for about 3% of the land, which we agreed in different agreements to swap with other parts that were vacant lands. Don't forget that the Palestinians also needed passage between Gaza and the West Bank, which also speaks for a big portion of the land, and that's even, for them it's very important. So if that's what we want, why don't we start treating this as such and not put all the PR and all the stakes on one settlement that's in the middle of an Arab village in some place that most of the country don't think that that's the exact place that we're going to fight to death to keep, and causes the most issues. I was the right-hand man for economic growth for the legendary builder in Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek. He probably built more than any other person in history in Jerusalem. When we wanted to build in Gilo or Givat Tzarfatit or in Ramot, we did not evacuate 5 Arab families from an Arab neighborhood a week before and have the New York Times portray Gilo as an Arab neighborhood. We opened a clinic in Sheikh Jarrah and created some goodwill. And we didn't do it in the face of the world. We did it in a way that was legitimate, was something that we believed in terms of building in Jerusalem. And it was not going like this. 2 days after Egypt was at our side, the Palestinian Authority was at our side in the negotiations, the Americans, of course, were trying to help. We annexed 1,000 acres. What's that about? And what's the timing about when you're working with partners that are trying to stand by you in some other forms and you're actually enjoying their contribution to the negotiations. So maybe even, I'm not even going into that very territory. I'm talking about the merits and the timing of this move. And why are we letting the world define us around the settlement activities in very problematic places that some of us in Israel have very big criticism over? And so for some of us, this is wrong, even though we do see a compromise to be quite complicated. And this was something that was initially agreed upon already in more than one instance. At some point, we got to say, this is where we draw the line, and we're not going to risk everything for another 3/10 on another ridge that is 20 kilometers inside an Arab set of villages. Why? Why? Because we want to stop a compromise? Because we want to go against the compromise? Because we want a one-state solution? Let me ask you, what's a one-state solution? What is going to be the nature of the state 20 years from now? I mean, what are we working on? I mean, so what is our vision? Do we want to be 20 years from now, you know, with people that don't have voting rights? Do we want to give them voting rights? What is it that we want to do? So I would say it's some tough decisions. Not all of it is easy, but you got to make some tough decisions and try to move forward. I'm not saying giving it up front. I'm saying, you know, we're in the Middle East. If you're going to negotiate for a carpet, don't say your final price in the beginning. But, you know, and this is what I wanted to say to the American president when he wanted us to declare a freeze of settlements before the negotiation. Let the Palestinians get it from us in the negotiations. It's going to be worth a lot more in the dynamics of negotiations. Who's ever negotiated deals here, even with American entrepreneurs, knows that. So I would say that I think that putting a lot of energy and money and resources in settlements which are isolated in the middle of an Arab population is wrong. It's the wrong kind of priorities for Israel. I would determine where we want to be. I would build there, because in Jerusalem nobody's going to tell me not to build, but I wouldn't do it on the day of the visit of Biden, you know? I would do it at a time where things could be, you know, where we could give the assurance that, look, we're building here. This is another neighborhood or another 20 houses. It's part of the neighborhood that already exists. It's not in an Arab community. It's on a vacant ridge, and it's part of what we consider as the agreement, and maybe not do it in the midst of very delicate negotiations, you know? The question is whether Jerusalem is negotiable or not. All the easy questions. We're solving everything here. I have to answer. It's a tough question. But let me give you another perspective on Jerusalem. For a second, just do a thought experiment. Instead of talking about the borders of Jerusalem, think about the content of Jerusalem as a big city, no matter where the border is, for just one moment. And there's a sizable Jewish population, of course, overwhelming majority, and there's an Arab population, ultra-Orthodox population. Think of this city, and think of the three religions that look at Jerusalem as a spiritual center. And of course, it's the capital of the Jewish people. And I'm asking us, and this is going to be a spiritual answer. I didn't plan on that. I was planning on talking to you about business and economics and things like that. But I'll go for it. Think of what is the vision of our role in Jerusalem as the Jewish people. Yes, it is our capital. It's a place where David chose after there was a big debate between Israel and Yehudah. He chose a city of the Jebusites. He didn't conquer it with force. He came with Yoav in the middle of the night through the wells, and they opened the gates for him because he knew a lot of people in Jerusalem, and they were friendly to him. He had an international perspective before he was a king, which was good. And remember that Isaiah, in chapter 2, remember that chapter when he has this vision, when he views the Israelites taken out of Jerusalem in chains, women and children, and there's smoke and blood and tears and death, he had this vision where he projected Jerusalem at a different time, which is a spiritual center that is our capital, but is also, remember, chapter 2, Isaiah, go and read it tonight. It's such a chapter. It's like, it talks about Paris, the city of light. It's Jerusalem, a city of light. He said, light onto the nation. He didn't say that everybody will become Jewish. He said that they will view our God as their God. And he gave us a little bit of a, you know how sometimes you're the trustee? You may view this as a capital for yourself, but you're also the trustee for other people who view Jerusalem as a central place. I suggest that that's how we view our city, that it's both for the Israelites, to talk in biblical terms, but it's also a cosmopolitan city in a way. It's part of our strength, not our weakness. Now that you have that view culturally, think about on the cultural layer, a little bit of a center of excellence for the Jewish people, but also a center of excellence for the Christians, the Muslims, spiritually. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for the city. It makes it an exciting city. And then think about how to build it so that the Arab community could have a vibrant, creative set of activities there. Of course, us, and then the international community. If you think of that concept, you can't lose, because this city has so much intensity. Let me tell you something. I have a theater in Jerusalem that I built in 2002, the height of the Intifada. The #1 play that won all the awards was a production that was called Salome by Oscar Wilde. Remember Salome? And so we had a cast. We didn't say it was an Arab-Israeli play, actors, but we just chose the best actors out of the city. We had John the Baptist was a rabbi, Baruch Brenner. Salome was Clara Khoury, who played in The Syrian Bride, so she was an Arab actress. And we had a cast of characters from all over the place. In the opening nights, you know, you put all these productions and then they only play like for 30 nights and you spend all this money. But in the opening nights, you had a line, because we only have 400 seats in this little theater. It's like, Joe's in the public arts theater in Tribeca. Yeah, so you had people from the secular neighborhoods in Jerusalem. You had people from the religious neighborhoods in Jerusalem. You had people coming from the Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and you had people coming from Bethlehem, which is 7 miles away, by the way, and Ramallah. And you even had people from the different city of Tel Aviv coming to us in Jerusalem because they looked down on us for culture. And you saw how things were going to be in Jerusalem after the politicians will get its act together from these artists. You saw a city that Tel Aviv couldn't match with the different levels of energies that were going on around that theater that came from different perspectives, but this is what Jerusalem was about. And with that vision, I think that any solution, and I'm not going to be foolish enough to draw a map here with you, but I will say that any solution in Jerusalem needs to think about the fact that there's about 20 villages around Jerusalem that we decided to call Jerusalem, that none of us in Jerusalem really views Jerusalem. It's like the refugee camp of Shuafat. That's Jerusalem? No, this could be compromised because it's a Palestinian area, and it's tied to Ramallah anyway, and you want there to be a connection. So I think there is actually a possibility for a settlement where Israel has control of most of the things, where you give, just like we have today, and by the way, Teddy Kollek and Moshe Dayan did it at the time, they left the Waqf a place of dignity out of choice, even though we had the force out of choice, just like they left the Holy Sepulchral Church to be managed by the Christians, and by the way, they need us to manage some of it because they have rivalries within the Christian community, and we do that. And this was done out of respect and out of sensitivity, and there's a way to solve this. But the solution needs to celebrate Jerusalem, not divide it no matter where the border lies. It needs to be a city that's thriving from the different communities. Because that city, let me tell you, when you do something powerful in Jerusalem with all these energies, it has a big effect. It has a huge effect. Are the Iranians developing something that can go through the Iron Dome? I should just tell you that the Iron Dome is not meant to solve all the issues in terms of missile attacks on Israel. There's some other strategies as well that actually Israel and the U.S. are cooperating on, and I hope it's not going to be tested and we won't need to use it. When it comes to Iran, I'm worried primarily about the nuclear strategy right now, and I'm worried about the fact, and something that people, which is discussed, all right, and something that's not discussed so much is the arms transport into the outpost of Hezbollah, which basically if you, wherever in Lebanon you saw that it's a wonderful country, but they now have this organization that took over the country, and it's really an outpost for Hezbollah, and you know, they're using Syria, and everybody talks about Syria and ISIS, but why don't we talk about Syria? And I mean, if the U.S. and others are going to help Assad to battle ISIS, why don't we ask for something in return, which stop the shipments and try to, just like you had a cleanup or a process to try to clean up the, you know, the chemical weaponry in Syria. Why don't we demand a cleanup of Lebanon or a demilitarization? Because Hezbollah has more missiles than most European countries in terms of, and much more developed than these pipes with an engine that the Hamas has. So this is something to worry about, and Iran is something to worry about primarily, not necessarily because of their missiles, but because of their strategy in the nuclear process. And I would hope, I mean, the U.S. is the leader here, and the U.S. is leading a negotiation strategy. And, you know, one can accept it or not accept it, but that's the situation right now. And I just hope that negotiations will be as such that it will set back the program to at least a 2-year delta, so that both the U.S. and Israel and other people could respond if they ever change their mind or try to do something else. One should worry. We are worried. And it's a complicated situation. So how much of a role is natural gas and oil going to play in the region? So we should say that we did discover natural gas on offshore. And it's a great, you know, it's a great set of news for Israel. And it's going to be drilled, and it's going to be monetized, and it's huge. And I was on the committee that was creating the fund and how it would be invested from the proceeds. And we've actually set a few goals for that fund that's going to be reinvested in the social aspects in terms of gaps in society that need to be you know, brought together, and also science and technology and regional development. Of course, I was sitting on the committee actually with an ultra-Orthodox leader, Gafni, which is a great guy as well. And so that's going to be really interesting, and I can say that it's going to be something that the region will need to cooperate on. And I think that the deal that's being negotiated right now, it's a 3-way deal between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan in terms of supplying some of the natural gas, which is great in terms of the alliance. So I think it presents a major opportunity. And the other thing to think about is that fossil fuels were so important in the last 50 years. And the big question whether they're going to be as important in the next 50 years. And how the U.S. and the rest of the world are going to view the Middle East. So I think that because there's going to be some shifts in strategic sort of importance, we should solve the issues in the next 5 years, where we are still very important, and where the stakes are still high, and we still have a strong ally, and I think we will in the future as well, but that when Israel is really viewed as really important democracy and vibrant and interesting, and people need to cooperate with us. I think this is the time to make some of the moves. What's the take on the boycott, both academic and economic, on Israel? You know, it's terrible. It's something that needs to be combated, once again, through the academy, through businesses. I can tell you that it's not new. It just has reincarnations. I can tell you that I had 9 sovereign governments investing in my fund. We had a pretty good fund. And so I can tell you that every 2 or 3 years, there would be some set of governments or pension funds or insurance companies in some parts of Europe or other places that would say, we're not investing in Israel. And we always, they closed the door, we came through the window, and this is something that is going to be a process. It is a problem. It is a problem. So once again, we need to move forward. We do need to move forward. We should combat the problem on the academic level. I think there should be joint ventures between Israeli and American universities. I think there should be great ideas that should be developed together. And this is part of the things that we're doing in region-to-region development, just like you have a federation supporting a city. I'm looking for joint ventures like you have between Cornell and the Technion. And there's some other themes that we should be developing. But I can tell you that the best strategy, if possible, would be to proactively try to solve some of the issues in the next 5 years. It's a good idea.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.